Have you ever felt invisible inside the house built by your own two hands? I spent 25 years working until my fingers bled, only to be handed a paper kicking me out onto the street. But when I helped that older man into the villa, my wife, the woman who always looked down on me, dropped her wine glass. Her face went pale as a sheet. That bus ride didn't just save me. It unmasked a 20-year secret. My name is Joseph Garcia. I am 48 years old, and I am a ghost in a house made of solid oak and brick. The silence in my home is not the peaceful kind. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where an argument has just ended, or perhaps where one is about to begin. I stood in the hallway of the colonial-style house in Silverwood Bay, a structure I had spent the last 15 years paying for plank by plank, dollar by dollar. The morning light filtered through the high windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the floorboards I had installed myself. I knew every knot in this wood. I knew exactly which board would creak if you stepped on it with too much weight. I knew the soul of this house because I had poured my own life into it. Yet, as I stood there in my work boots, terrified to take a step onto the pristine Persian rug my wife had bought 3 months ago, I felt like an intruder. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a carpenter, large and rough, mapped with a landscape of white scars and calluses that never quite healed. There was a fresh cut on my left thumb from a chisel slip 2 days ago, a jagged red line against the weathered brown skin. Sawdust seemed permanently etched into my fingerprints, no matter how hard I scrubbed with the pumice stone. These hands had built cabinets for the mayor. They had framed the new library downtown. They had held my son Leo when he was small enough to fit in the crook of my arm. Now they hung uselessly by my sides, heavy and awkward. From the kitchen I heard the clinking of porcelain. It was a delicate sound, sharp and precise. Elena was awake. I took a breath, smelling the faint scent of stale sawdust on my flannel shirt, and walked into the kitchen. The room was blindingly white. White marble countertops, white cabinets, stainless steel appliances that hummed with a low, expensive vibration. Elena sat at the island scrolling through her tablet. She did not look up when I entered. My wife is a beautiful woman. Even after 25 years of marriage, it still hurts me to look at her sometimes, because she seems to belong to a different species. Her hair was perfectly styled, dyed a rich chestnut color that caught the light. She wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than I made in a week of framing houses. Her nails were manicured, painted a deep crimson tapping rhythmically against the glass of her tablet. She looked like the mistress of the manor. I looked like the hired help who had come to fix the sink. "Coffee is in the pot," she said, her voice flat. She still did not look at me. "Morning, Elena," I said. My voice sounded raspy, unused. I walked to the counter and poured myself a mug of black coffee. I was careful not to let the ceramic mug hit the granite too hard. Elena hated noise. "Did you get the message?" she asked. I froze the mug halfway to my lips. "What message?" "From Leo," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were cold, sweeping over my flannel shirt and worn jeans with a familiar disdain. It was a look I had seen evolve over the years. In the beginning, when we were young and broke, she looked at me with admiration. She loved that I could fix anything. She loved the strength in my arms. But as she climbed the social ladder of Silverwood Bay, joining the garden clubs and the charity boards, my strength became a liability. My work became dirty. She started introducing me to her new friends as a construction consultant, rather than a carpenter. She stopped holding my hand in public because the roughness snagged on her silk dresses. "I haven't checked my phone," I muttered. I pulled the old smartphone from my pocket. The screen was cracked in the corner, a spiderweb fracture from when I dropped it at a job site 6 months ago. There was one notification, a text from Leo. "Meet me at the office at 10. We need to handle the paperwork. Don't be late." It was not a request. It was a summons. No "Hi, Dad." No "How are you?" Just a demand. My heart sank in my chest, a heavy stone dropping into deep water. Leo is 24 years old now. He was a junior associate at Apex Justice Partners, a law firm in the city. He drove a German car. He wore suits that cost $2,000. He had my eyes, but he had his mother's ambition. We hadn't had a real conversation in 3 years. "Paperwork," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "What paperwork, Elena?" She went back to her tablet. "Just legal things, Joseph. Reorganizing the assets. It is for the tax benefits. Leo explained it all last week, but you were probably too busy sanding something to listen." I had not been too busy. No one had told me anything. But I did not argue. I never argued anymore. It took too much energy, and I had none left. The tiredness I felt was not physical. It went deeper than the muscles in my back, or the ache in my knees. It was a weariness of the soul. "I made him something," I said softly. Elena paused. "What?" "For Leo," I said. "I made him something, since I am seeing him today." I reached into the deep pocket of my work coat and pulled out the object. It was a small wooden horse carved from a single block of cherry wood. I had spent 4 nights working on it in the garage, shaping the curves of the muscles, the flow of the mane. It was intricate polish to a shine with natural oils. When Leo was a boy, 5 or 6 years old, he used to love horses. He would sit on the floor of my workshop playing with the scraps of wood, begging me to make him knights and dragons. I remembered the way his face would light up when I handed him a finished toy. I remembered the way he used to hug my leg, smelling of sawdust and childhood. I placed the wooden horse on the white marble counter. It looked out of place, a piece of organic warmth in a cold, sterile room. Elena looked at it. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, and then her lip curled slightly. "Joseph, he is 24. He is a lawyer. He does not play with toys." "It's not a toy," I defended weakly. "It's a memento, a desk ornament." "It's dust," she said. "He has a modern office, glass and steel. That thing will just gather dust." She pushed her coffee cup away and stood up. "Go get changed. You cannot go to Apex looking like that." "Like what?" I looked down at myself. "Like a laborer," she hissed. The venom in her voice was sudden and sharp. "Leo has worked very hard to get where he is. He has an image to maintain. Do not embarrass him, Joseph. Please, for once, just try to look like you belong in this century." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I have my suit." "The gray one?" She laughed, a short, dry sound. "The one you bought 10 years ago. It smells like mothballs and failure, Joseph. Just try to clean yourself up and hurry. The bus to the city takes 45 minutes. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I was left alone with the silence and the wooden horse. I reached out and touched the smooth curve of the wood. I had sanded it with 600 grit paper until it felt like satin. I had put my love into this wood, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Leo would touch it and feel that connection. Hoping that beneath the expensive suit and the law degree, my son was still in there somewhere. I went to the bedroom to change. The master bedroom was another territory where I felt like an alien. The bed was enormous, covered in pillows that served no function other than decoration. I opened my side of the closet. It was small, squeezed into the corner. Elena's clothes took up 90% of the space. Rows of dresses, coats, shoes, still in their boxes. My section held 3 flannel shirts, 2 pairs of work pants, and the gray suit. I took the suit out. It did look tired. The fabric was thin at the elbows. The lapels were too wide for current fashion. I put it on, struggling with the top button of the white shirt, which had grown tight around my neck. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked defeated. My face was weathered from years of working in the sun. I had deep lines around my eyes and mouth. My hair was graying at the temples. The suit didn't make me look like a businessman. It made me look like a worker trying to dress up for court, which I realized with a sudden jolt of anxiety was exactly where I was going. A law firm. I walked back downstairs. Elena was waiting by the door, checking her watch. "You are going to be late," she snapped. "The bus leaves in 12 minutes." "You aren't coming?" I asked. "I have my own car," she said. "I have errands to run first. I will meet you there." She looked me up and down and sighed. It was a sigh of deep, exhausted disappointment. "Well, it is the best we can do, I suppose. Just try not to speak too much. Let Leo handle the talking. He knows what is best for us." "Us," I repeated. "Right." She opened the door. "Go, run. If you miss the 42, you miss the appointment." I grabbed the wooden horse from the counter and shoved it into my suit pocket. It created a bulky bulge against the fabric, ruining the line of the jacket, but I didn't care. I needed it. It was my talisman. "Goodbye, Elena," I said. She didn't answer. She was already typing on her phone again. I stepped out of the house into the cool air of Silverwood Bay. The morning was overcast, the sky a sheet of gray steel. I walked down the driveway, the concrete cracked in places I had been meaning to fix for 2 years, but never had the time. I looked back at the house. It was a beautiful structure. 2 stories, brick facade, large bay windows. I remembered framing that roof. I remembered the summer I spent laying the shingles sweating until I was dehydrated, just to save $3,000 on labor costs, so we could afford the granite Elena wanted for the kitchen. I had built this life for them. I had built the walls that protected them. And now, they looked at me as if I were a termite eating away at the foundation. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the street. My work boots were heavy on my feet. I had decided against the dress shoes because they pinched my toes, and I knew I would be doing a lot of walking. Work boots with a suit. I looked ridiculous. I knew it. The neighbors driving by in their luxury sedans slowed down slightly to look at me, and I turned my head away, pretending to study the schedule on the signpost. The wind picked up blowing dead leaves across the pavement. There was a heaviness in the air today. A pressure. It felt like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm when the ions change and the birds stop singing. My stomach churned with a mixture of hunger and dread. Why did Leo want to meet at the office? Why the sudden urgency? Paperwork could mean anything. Refinancing the mortgage? Updating the will. But deep down in the pit of my gut where instinct lives, I knew it wasn't something simple. You don't summon your father to a high-rise tower to talk about refinancing. You do it over Sunday dinner. You do it with a beer in hand. But we didn't have Sunday dinners anymore. And Leo didn't drink beer with me. He drank scotch with his partners. I checked my pocket, my fingers brushing against the smooth wood of the horse. It was my anchor. I told myself that Leo would like it. I told myself that once we got past the legal talk, I would hand it to him, and he would smile, that crooked, gap-toothed smile he had when he was 7, and say, "Thanks, Dad, this is cool." We would talk about the grain of the wood. Maybe I could ask him about his job. Maybe he would ask me about the cabinet I was building for the Millers. It was a fantasy, fragile as glass, but I held on to it. The rumble of a diesel engine broke my thoughts. The number 42 bus turned the corner, its brakes screeching as it approached the stop. It was a monstrosity of metal and grime, a stark contrast to the sleek cars gliding past it. This was my carriage, the chariot of the invisible class. The doors hissed open. The driver, a man with a tired face and thick glasses, didn't even look at me as I climbed the steps. I dropped $2.50 into the fare box. The coins clinked loudly, a sound that seemed to echo my poverty in a town of wealth. I moved down the aisle. The bus was crowded, filled with people heading into the city for the morning shift. Nurses in scrubs, students with backpacks, construction workers like me, though none of them were wearing ill-fitting gray suits. I found a seat near the back, squeezing in next to a window that was clouded with condensation and grit. As the bus lurched forward, leaving Silverwood Bay behind, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. I watched the manicured lawns and the white picket fences blur into streaks of green and white. I was leaving the world I had built, heading into the concrete jungle, where my son reigned as a prince. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest, a pang of loneliness so acute it almost made me gasp. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never felt more alone. I was a husband who was tolerated, a father who was ashamed of, a man who had given everything and received nothing but a text message demanding his presence. The bus picked up speed, merging onto the highway. The city skyline loomed in the distance, a cluster of jagged teeth biting into the gray sky. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, my fate was waiting for me. I closed my eyes and gripped the wooden horse in my pocket, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that today would not break me. But as the wheels hummed against the asphalt, a dark whisper in my mind told me that the breaking had already begun years ago, and today was simply the day the pieces would finally fall apart. The number 42 bus rattled and groaned as it pushed deeper into the city, moving away from the quiet, decaying suburbs of Silverwood Bay and toward the gleaming spires of the financial district. The air inside the vehicle was stale, a recycled mixture of diesel fumes, damp wool, and the metallic tang of too many bodies pressed into a confined space. I sat with my knees jammed against the plastic seat in front of me, my hands resting on my thighs. The vibration of the engine traveled up through the soles of my heavy work boots, a constant numbing tremor that seemed to match the shaking in my own nerves. We stopped at a corner near the edge of the industrial zone, the brakes squealing with a high-pitched protest that set my teeth on edge. The doors hissed open, and a gust of cold, wet wind swirled through the aisle, carrying with it the scent of rain on asphalt. That was when he stepped on. He was an old man, easily past 80 years of age. He moved with a fragility that made my own 48-year-old aches feel trivial. He wore a tweed overcoat that had likely been fashionable 3 decades ago, but was now threadbare at the elbows and missing a button near the collar. A gray newsboy cap was pulled low over his forehead, and his hands trembling with what looked like Parkinson's. Or perhaps just the brutal weight of time clutched a wooden cane, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. I watched him pay his fare. It was a slow, painful process. He dug into a coin purse with shaking fingers, retrieving quarters one by one. The driver, a man whose patience had evidently evaporated hours ago, tapped the steering wheel with a rhythmic, irritated thud. Behind the old man, a line of commuters began to form, checking their watches, sighing loudly, radiating a collective annoyance that the world had dared to slow down for 30 seconds. When the transaction was finally complete, the old man turned to face the gauntlet of the aisle. The bus was packed. Every seat was taken. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the center, gripping the overhead straps. I watched, waiting for the dance of civility to begin. I waited for anyone to stand up. Nothing happened. It was a masterclass in human indifference. The passengers suddenly became intensely interested in the advertisements for personal injury lawyers plastered above the windows. They stared at their shoes. They stared at the gray blur of the city outside. They stared most intently of all at the glowing rectangles of their phones scrolling through feeds of other people's lives, so they would not have to acknowledge the life struggling right in front of them. The old man took a tentative step forward. The bus lurched into motion, pulling away from the curb with a violent jerk. He stumbled, his cane slipping on the wet floor mat. He managed to catch himself on a vertical pole, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the cold metal. He looked around, his eyes searching for a place to rest, a small island of mercy in this sea of apathy. His gaze fell on the priority seating area near the front. There was one seat occupied by a young man who could not have been more than 20 years old. He was dressed in a pristine hoodie and ripped designer jeans. On his head sat a pair of massive noise-canceling headphones, the kind that cost $300 and isolate you completely from the universe. His eyes were closed, his head bobbing slightly to a rhythm only he could hear. His legs were sprawled wide, taking up not just his own space but infringing on the aisle, a display of casual dominance that made my blood heat up. The old man stood right in front of him. He swayed as the bus hit a pothole. He looked at the young man, then looked around at the other passengers, a silent plea etched into the deep wrinkles of his face. The young man opened one eye. He saw the old man. He saw the trembling hand on the pole. He saw the instability. And then, with a coolness that was almost impressive in its cruelty, he closed his eyes again and turned his head toward the window. I felt a surge of rage so pure, it tasted like copper in my mouth. It was the same anger I felt when Elena looked at my sawdust-covered boots with disgust, the same anger I felt when Leo texted me like I was a subordinate. It was the anger of the invisible man screaming to be seen. I began to stand up. My seat was near the back, too far away to offer the old man my own spot immediately, but I intended to go down there and drag that kid out of his seat if I had to. But before I could fully rise, the traffic ahead of us locked up. The bus driver slammed on the brakes. The air pressure hissed violently, and the momentum shifted in a split second. The massive vehicle shuddered to a halt. Bodies flew forward, bags swung, and the old man, whose grip on the pole had been tenuous at best, was launched. He didn't make a sound. He just detached from the pole and fell backward, his cane clattering away. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. My body, trained by 3 decades of catching falling timber and reacting to slipping saws, moved on its own. I lunged from my seat, diving into the aisle. As I moved, the wooden horse I had carved for Leo, the peace offering I had spent 4 nights smoothing to perfection, slipped from my suit pocket. I heard it hit the floor. I heard the sickening crack of wood striking metal. But I could not stop for it. I threw my arms out and caught the old man just inches before his head would have struck the metal base of a seat. He was shockingly light, a bundle of hollow bones and loose fabric. We tumbled together onto the dirty floor of the bus, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact against the plastic seat frame. "I have you," I gasped, holding him steady as the bus rocked on its suspension. "I have you, sir." The bus went silent. The collective trance was broken. People were looking now. The driver twisted in his seat, shouting back to ask if everyone was all right. I ignored them. I checked the old man. He was shaking, his breath coming in shallow rasps, but he seemed unhurt. I helped him sit up, propping him against the side of the seat. Then I turned my head. The young man with the headphones was still sitting there. He had pulled one ear cup back to see what the commotion was, looked at us sprawled on the floor, and was now in the process of putting the headphone back over his ear. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap, but a quiet, definitive fracture. I stood up. My knees popped. I brushed the dirt from my cheap gray suit trousers, though it didn't matter anymore. I loomed over the young man. I am not a giant, but working with wood keeps you broad. I cast a shadow over him. "Get up," I said. My voice was low, trembling with adrenaline. He looked up, annoyed. He pointed to his headphones, feigning deafness. I didn't repeat myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was old. The screen cracked, but the camera worked. I swiped up, hit the video record button, and shoved the lens 6 inches from his face. "What are you doing, man?" he shouted, his cool facade cracking instantly. He swatted at my hand. "Get that out of my face." "I am live streaming," I lied. The red dot was recording, but I had no audience. It didn't matter. The threat was enough. "I am going to show the entire city exactly who you are. I want everyone to see the face of the man who watches an 80-year-old grandfather smash his head on the floor because he is too comfortable to move his legs." I held the phone steady. "Smile. You are going to be a viral star. I bet your mother will be so proud when she sees this on the news tonight." The color drained from his face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the terrified vanity of a generation that lives and dies by its digital reflection. He scrambled up, tangling in his headphone cord. "I didn't see him," he stammered, holding his hands up to block the camera. "I was sleeping." "You are crazy, man." "Move!" I barked. "Now!" He practically tripped over himself to get to the back of the bus, burying his face in his hoodie to hide from the lens. I stopped recording and lowered the phone. My hand was shaking. The other passengers were staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I didn't care about them either. I turned back to the old man. I extended a hand. "Here, sir. Please." Take this seat." He looked up at me, and for the first time I really saw him. He had the most extraordinary eyes I had ever seen. They were a piercing electric blue, sharp, and clear amidst the roadmap of wrinkles on his face. They were not the cloudy eyes of the senile. They were the eyes of a hawk. There was intelligence there and a depth of sorrow that mirrored my own. He took my hand. His grip was surprisingly firm for a moment, before the tremor returned. I hoisted him up and settled him into the seat the boy had vacated. "Thank you," he said. His voice was gravelly, like stones grinding together in a riverbed. It was an educated voice, precise in its diction. That was quite a performance. "I hate bullies," I muttered, feeling the adrenaline begin to fade, leaving me exhausted again. "And I hate gravity," he chuckled softly, adjusting his cap. "It seems we both have our adversaries today." I looked down at the floor, the wooden horse. It was lying near the wheel well. I walked over and picked it up. My heart sank. One of the front legs had snapped off cleanly at the knee. The intricate carving, the hours of sanding the silent hope I had embedded in the grain. It was broken. I stared at the severed piece of wood in my palm. It felt like an omen, a sign that no matter how hard I tried to fix things, the universe had other plans. "You dropped that when you caught me," the old man said. He was watching me closely. "I am sorry. It looks handmade." I sat down in the empty seat next to him. I didn't want to stand anymore. I felt heavy. "It is," I said, turning the broken horse over in my fingers. "Cherry wood. I made it for my son." "You are a craftsman," he stated. It wasn't a question. He was looking at my hands, at the calluses, and the fresh cut on my thumb. "I am a carpenter," I corrected. "Or I was. Now I am just a man in a cheap suit going to a meeting I don't want to attend." The old man studied the horse. "It is beautiful work. Even broken, the spirit of the animal is there. Your son appreciate this kind of skill?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Leo? No. Leo appreciates conviction rates and billable hours. He is a lawyer. He works in one of those glass towers downtown, Apex Justice Partners." The old man's eyebrows rose slightly. A flicker of something unreadable passed through those blue eyes. "Apex," he repeated. "A prestigious firm. Very aggressive." "That is one word for it," I said. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes for a second. I didn't know why I was talking to this stranger. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was because he was the only person on this bus who had looked at me like a human being. "I am going there now to sign everything over to him." "Everything?" the old man asked softly. "The house," I said. "My workshop, the land. It is all I have. My wife says it is for tax purposes, asset protection. But I know what it is. They don't think I am capable anymore. Or maybe they just want to make sure I don't spend it on something foolish before I die." "And you are going to do it?" he asked. "You are just going to sign?" I opened my eyes and looked at him. "He is my son," I said simply. "I spent my whole life building that house for him. If he wants the paper that says it is his, why should I fight him? That is what a father should do, isn't it? Give everything to his children until there is nothing left of himself?" The old man didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He handed it to me. I hadn't realized I was sweating. "There is a difference between sacrifice and theft," the old man said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that cut through the noise of the engine. "A father gives his strength to his son so the son can stand on his own 2 feet. He does not cut off his own legs just because the son asks for them." I looked at him, startled by the sharpness of the metaphor. "I don't have much of a choice. If I don't sign, I lose them. My wife is already halfway out the door. If I refuse this, she is gone. And Leo will never speak to me again." "Fear," the old man murmured. "A powerful motivator, but a poor counselor." The bus began to slow down again. We were entering the dense grid of the city center. The shadows of the skyscrapers fell across the windows, plunging us into a premature twilight. "I am Joseph, by the way," I said, extending my hand again. It felt polite to introduce myself to the man I had saved. He took my hand. His skin was like dry parchment paper, cool and thin. "I am Arthur," he said. He didn't give a last name. He just held my gaze with those intense blue eyes. "You have good hands, Joseph. Honest hands. Do not let the people in the glass towers make you ashamed of them." "Thanks, Arthur," I said, putting the broken horse back into my pocket. "But in this city, honest hands don't buy you much respect." "You might be surprised," he said enigmatically. He turned to look out the window as we passed the sprawling construction site of a new bank headquarters. "Sometimes the structure of the world is more fragile than it looks. Sometimes all it takes is one honest man to pull the right pin and the whole thing comes down." I didn't understand what he meant. I assumed he was just rambling the way old men do when they are trying to make sense of a world that has moved on without them. I just nodded and checked the time on my cracked phone. It was 9:45 in the morning. I had 15 minutes to get to the office. "This is my stop coming up," I said, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "I have to get off at 4th and Grand." "Is that so?" Arthur smiled, a small, thin curling of his lips. "It appears we are going to the same place. I have some business in that district myself." "Let me help you then," I said. The bus hissed to a halt. The doors opened. I stood up and offered my arm to Arthur. He took it, leaning heavily on me as we navigated the steps. The young man with the headphones was nowhere to be seen. He must have scrambled off at the previous stop to escape his shame. We stepped out onto the sidewalk. The wind in the city was fierce, channeled through the canyon of buildings. It whipped at Arthur's coat and flattened my hair against my skull. Above us, the Apex Justice Partners building pierced the sky, a monolith of blue glass and steel that seemed to look down on us with cold indifference. "Well," I said, looking up at the tower, "into the belly of the beast." Arthur followed my gaze. He didn't look intimidated. He looked critical, like an architect inspecting a flaw in the foundation. "Yes," Arthur said softly. "The beast. Let us see if it still has teeth." I didn't know why he was staying with me. I assumed he would walk away toward a pharmacy or a park bench. But he stood there waiting for me to move, as if we were partners, entering a battle together. And strangely, I was glad for it. I was about to walk into a room with my wife and son, who wanted to strip me of my dignity, but at least for the walk to the front door, I wasn't entirely alone. I had a man named Arthur, and a broken wooden horse, and the lingering warmth of a small act of courage on the number 42 bus. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The walk from the bus stop to the entrance of Apex Justice Partners was less than 2 blocks, but it felt like crossing the border between two warring nations. The sidewalk changed first. The cracked, gum-stained concrete of the bus zone gave way to smooth, polished granite pavers that seemed to repel dirt by sheer force of will. The wind here did not feel like the natural wind that blew through the trees in Silverwood Bay. It felt like a manufactured current, accelerated by the wind tunnels created by the skyscrapers, designed to strip away any warmth you might be clinging to. I walked slowly, my work boots making a heavy, dull thud against the expensive stone. Beside me, Arthur moved with a surprising determination. He tapped his cane rhythmically, his breath forming small clouds in the chill air, but he did not complain. I had expected to leave him at the bus stop, perhaps point him toward a bench or a coffee shop where he could recover, but he had stuck to my side like a shadow. "You do not have to do this, Arthur," I said, raising my voice slightly over the noise of the city traffic. "I can manage from here. This is a place for, well, it is not a place for resting." Arthur glanced up at the towering structure in front of us. The Apex building was a monstrosity of blue glass and steel 50 stories high, reflecting the gray sky and twisting the clouds into distorted shapes. It looked less like a building, and more like a fortress, a citadel, where the high priests of the law looked down upon the common people. "I told you, Joseph," Arthur said, his voice raspy but firm. "I have business here, and besides, I am curious to see the inside of the belly of the beast. It has been a long time since I walked through a front door like this." I did not have the energy to argue. I reached into my jacket pocket. The sharp edges of the broken wooden horse were digging into my side through the thin lining of my suit. I pulled out the pieces. The head was severed from the body, a jagged wound in the cherry wood. I could not bear to put them back in the pocket where they would grind against each other, so I fished out an old, crumpled brown paper bag I had stuffed in my other pocket earlier that morning. It was a habit from my construction days. I always kept a bag for trash or for saving a half-eaten sandwich. I placed the broken horse pieces inside the bag and rolled the top down. Now, clutching the wrinkled paper sack in my hand, I looked even less like a man who belonged here. We reached the revolving doors. They were massive, rotating with a silent, heavy precision. I timed my step, shuffling in with Arthur, close behind, and we were deposited into the lobby. If the outside was intimidating, the inside was designed to make you feel microscopic. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by columns of black marble that looked cold enough to freeze water on contact. The floor was a vast expanse of white stone, polished to such a high sheen that I could see the reflection of the recessed lighting above, looking like stars trapped beneath the ice. The air was perfectly still, scented with something chemical and expensive. White tea and ozone, perhaps. It smelled like money. There was no sound of construction, no smell of sawdust, no warmth of human labor. There was only the hushed murmur of serious conversations and the click-clack of leather soles on stone. Men and women in suits that cost more than my car moved through the space with purpose, their eyes fixed on their phones, or the horizon, never making eye contact. I felt a wave of nausea. I was a speck of dust in a sterile laboratory. I looked down at my gray suit, the one Elena had laughed at. Here, under these unforgiving lights, it looked even worse. The fabric was dull, the cut boxy and outdated. My boots were scuffed. And in my hand, I held a wrinkled brown paper bag like a schoolboy's lunch. Arthur stood beside me, leaning on his cane. He did not look intimidated. He looked around the lobby with a critical eye, scanning the security guards, the artwork on the walls. Giant, abstract splashes of red and black that looked violent, and the flow of people. He looked like a building inspector, searching for a crack in the foundation. "Come on," I whispered, mostly to myself. "Let's get this over with." We approached the reception desk. It was a massive slab of black granite, behind which sat 2 young women who looked like they had been genetically engineered for indifference. They wore identical headsets and typed on silent keyboards. I stepped up to the desk. The woman on the left did not look up. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said. She finished typing a sentence, hit enter with a flourish, and then slowly raised her eyes. Her gaze started at the top of my head, slid down over my frayed collar, paused on the paper bag in my hand, and finally rested on my boots. When she looked back up to my face, her expression was one of polite confusion, as if I were a delivery driver who had wandered into the wrong building. "Deliveries are at the loading dock on 4th Street, she said. Her voice was pleasant, robotic, and completely dismissive. "You need to go around the back." I felt the blood rush to my face. "I am not a delivery driver," I said, gripping the paper bag tighter. "I am here to see Leo Garcia. He is an associate here." She blinked, her perfect eyelashes fluttering. "You have an appointment?" "Yes. Well, he told me to come. He is my son." The skepticism on her face was so naked, it felt like a slap. She looked from me to Arthur, who was standing quietly a few feet away, looking like a disheveled grandfather who had gotten lost on the way to the park. "Name?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Joseph Garcia," she typed. She frowned. she typed again. I do not see a Joseph Garcia on Mr. Garcia's calendar. His schedule is fully booked today with the partners. He texted me, I insisted, pulling out my phone. My hands were shaking. I hated this. I hated having to beg for entry to see my own child. Look, he said come at 10 o'clock. She didn't look at the phone. She looked at the security guard standing near the elevators. The guard, a large man with a bored expression, took a step toward us. Sir, the receptionist said, her voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. I cannot let you up without a confirmed appointment in the system. Mr. Garcia is in a high-level meeting. I cannot disturb him for personal matters. It is not a personal matter, I said, my voice rising slightly. It is legal paperwork. He wants me to sign papers. Then he should have sent them to you, she said. Please step aside. You are blocking the flow for other clients. I stood there paralyzed. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I wanted to turn around and leave. I wanted to run back to the bus stop and go home to my empty house and my workshop. But I couldn't. I had to sign the papers. I had to do what a father does. Arthur stepped forward. He placed his cane on the black granite desk with a sharp clack. The sound was loud enough to make the receptionist jump. The gentleman is expected, Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a strange authority. I suggest you call up and verify before you make a mistake you cannot undo. The receptionist looked at Arthur annoyed. And who are you? I am just an observer, Arthur said, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. But I have observed that this firm used to pride itself on efficiency. It seems standards have slipped. Before she could respond, a group of men walked by. They were laughing loud and confident. I recognized the type. Young, hungry, arrogant. They were clones of Leo. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair and a tie that was a blinding shade of yellow, stopped and looked at me. He looked at the paper bag in my hand. He looked at my boots. He grinned. Hey, the man called out. Is that the sandwich order for the conference room? I asked for extra mayo on the turkey club, buddy. Hope you didn't forget it. His colleagues laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. I froze. The paper bag crinkled in my grip. Inside, the broken legs of the wooden horse shifted. I looked at the man. He wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing a function. He was seeing a service. To him, a man in a cheap suit holding a paper bag could only be one thing: a servant. I am not, I started to say, but my throat closed up. What was the point? To tell him I was the father of his colleague? That would only embarrass Leo. That would only give them more ammunition to mock him. Oh, look at Leo's dad, the carpenter who looks like a homeless man. So I said nothing. I just lowered my head. Side door, buddy, the man said, clapping his friend on the back as they moved toward the elevators. Learn to read the signs. They stepped into the elevator, their laughter cut off as the doors slid shut. I stood alone in the middle of the lobby, the echo of their laughter still ringing in my ears. I felt stripped naked. I felt like the dirt they wiped off their shoes. Joseph, Arthur said softly. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I stared at the floor at my own distorted reflection in the white stone. I should go, I whispered. I should just leave the papers at the desk and go. Stay, Arthur said. Stand your ground. You have as much right to be here as they do. More, perhaps. You build things that stand up. They only build arguments that fall down. Suddenly, the elevator doors at the far end of the hall opened again. A figure stormed out. It was Leo. My heart leaped an instinctive reaction of a parent seeing their child. He looked impressive. He had filled out since I last saw him. He was wearing a navy blue suit that fit him like a second skin. His hair was perfectly cut. He looked powerful. He looked successful. But his face was not the face of a son greeting his father. It was a mask of fury. He marched across the lobby, his stride long and aggressive. He ignored the receptionist, ignored the security guard, and came straight for me. He stopped 2 feet away, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and coffee. "What are you doing?" he hissed. The words came out like steam from a pressure cooker. "Leo," I said, trying to smile, trying to find the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. "I got your text. I came for the papers." "I told you 10 o'clock, he snapped, checking his watch. "It is 10:12. You are late." "The bus," I started. "There was an incident on the bus. An old man fell." "I don't care about the bus," Leo cut me off. He looked around the lobby frantically, as if checking to see if anyone important was watching. His eyes landed on the paper bag in my hand. He recoiled. "What is that?" he demanded, pointing at the bag. "Why are you carrying garbage?" "Jesus, Dad. I told you to come to the office, not a picnic. You look like you just walked off a construction site." "It's not garbage," I stammered. "I brought you something." "But it broke." "I don't want it," Leo said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Throw it away. Now. Before one of the senior partners sees you standing here holding a bag of trash." He looked at me with such intensity, such raw embarrassment, that I took a step back. This wasn't just an annoyance. This was shame. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the gray suit. He was ashamed of the hands that had paid for his law school tuition. "And who is this?" Leo gestured violently toward Arthur. "Did you bring a friend? Is this a field trip? This is a law firm, Dad, not a community center." Arthur stood tall, leaning on his cane with both hands. He met Leo's angry gaze with a calmness that was almost terrifying. He didn't say a word. He just watched. His blue eyes seemed to be dissecting Leo, peeling back the layers of the expensive suit to see the rotting wood underneath. "He is a friend," I said quietly. "He is with me." Leo ran a hand through his hair, letting out a groan of frustration. "Unbelievable. Mom was right. You can't just do one simple thing, can you? You have to make a scene. You have to make it difficult." "I didn't mean to." "Just stop," Leo commanded. He pointed a finger at my chest. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not look at anyone. Follow me. We are going to the small conference room in the back. Not the main one. The back one. And for God's sake, hide that bag." He turned on his heel and marched toward the elevators, not waiting to see if I followed. I stood there for a second, the paper bag crunched in my fist. The sharp wood of the broken horse poked against my palm, a physical reminder of the pain in my chest. "Go on, Joseph," Arthur whispered beside me. "Go see what he has prepared for you." "I am sorry, Arthur," I said, my voice thick. "He isn't usually like this. He is just stressed." "Stress reveals character," Arthur said. "It does not alter it." We followed Leo toward the elevators. As the metal doors closed around us, shutting out the light of the lobby, I felt like I was entering a prison cell. My son was the warden, and my crime was simply existing in a world I could no longer afford. The elevator rose, carrying us up into the sky, away from the earth, away from reality, toward the final betrayal. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, cheerful chime that felt entirely out of place, given the tightness in my chest. I stepped out, expecting to be led toward the panoramic windows that offered a view of the city skyline, the kind of view that cost $500 an hour to rent. But Leo did not turn left toward the glass-walled conference rooms, filled with sunlight and expensive orchids. He turned right. We walked down a corridor that grew narrower and dimmer the further we went. The plush carpet turned into industrial gray tile. The air grew stale, losing the scent of white tea and money, replaced by the smell of photocopier toner and dust. We passed the break room, the janitorial closet, and the server room where the hum of machines was deafening. This was the intestines of the firm, the place where the ugly work happened, hidden away from the eyes of the paying clients. Arthur walked beside me, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the linoleum. He remained silent, but I could feel his presence like a shield at my back. Leo did not look at him, nor did he look at me. He just marched forward, his shoulders set in a tense, angry line. Finally, Leo stopped at a plain wooden door at the very end of the hall. There was no nameplate, just a number, room 4B. It looked like an interrogation room. "In here," Leo said, opening the door and gesturing impatiently. I stepped inside. The room was small, windowless, and lit by a fluorescent strip light that buzzed with a headache-inducing flicker. In the center was a scratched laminate table, surrounded by 4 mismatched chairs. But it wasn't the room that made my blood run cold. It was the people sitting at the table. Elena was there. My wife, who had told me she had errands to run, who had kissed my cheek. No, she hadn't kissed me. She had just told me to hurry. Was sitting there with her hands folded on the table. She was not wearing her usual casual clothes. She was wearing her best black dress, the one she saved for funerals and high-stakes charity galas. She looked poised, sharp, and terrifyingly beautiful. Next to her sat a man I did not know. He was younger than me, but older than Leo, with slicked back hair and a suit that looked shiny under the harsh lights. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile a shark might give a seal before dragging it under. "Elena?" I breathed the word, escaping me like a deflating balloon. "What are you doing here?" you said. "Sit down, Joseph," Elena said. Her voice was calm, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice she used when she was negotiating with a contractor for a lower price on kitchen tiles. I pulled out a chair and sat. The metal legs scraped loudly against the floor. Arthur remained standing near the door, leaning on his cane, his blue eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. Elena glanced at him with a flicker of annoyance, but quickly dismissed him as irrelevant, likely assuming he was some senile old man I had dragged along out of pity. "This is Mr. Vance," Leo said, taking the seat at the head of the table. He didn't introduce me to Mr. Vance. He just opened a leather folder and slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward me. "Mr. Garcia, the lawyer," Vance said smoothly. His voice was oily. "Good to meet you. We have prepared the documents as discussed. It is a standard transfer of deed and a voluntary termination of residency rights." I looked at the papers. The words swam before my eyes. Quitclaim deed, irrevocable trust, liquidation of assets. "I don't understand," I said, looking from Leo to Elena. Leo said this was for taxes. He said we were just reorganizing. Leo sighed, a sound of deep, dramatic exasperation. He looked at his mother. "I told you he would make this difficult." Elena reached out and placed her hand on the paperwork, her manicured nails tapping the bold text. "Joseph, listen to me. We are not reorganizing for taxes. We are selling the house." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Selling? But that is our home. I built it. I built every room in that house." "And it is worth a lot of money," Elena cut in. "The market in Silverwood Bay is at an all-time peak. We have a buyer lined up who is willing to pay cash. $1.5 million, Joseph. Do you have any idea what we can do with that kind of money?" "We don't need money," I said, my voice rising. "We have a home. We have no mortgage. I paid it off 3 years ago. Why would we sell it?" "Because I need the money," Leo said. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I have an opportunity to buy into a partnership here at Apex. It is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. But the buy-in is steep. I need capital. And Mom wants to move into the city." I looked at Elena. She met my gaze without flinching. "I am done, Joseph," she said. "I am done with the suburbs. I am done with the commute. And frankly, I am done with the sawdust." "The sawdust?" I whispered. "You smell like it," she spat, the veneer of civility finally cracking. "Every day, for 25 years, you come home and you smell like wood and sweat and glue. I tried to make you a gentleman, Joseph. I bought you suits. I introduced you to people, but you are always just a carpenter. I want to live in a penthouse. I want to go to the opera without driving for an hour. I want a life that matches the person I have become." "The person you have become," I repeated slowly. And who is that Elena? A woman who tricks her husband into signing away his home. It is not a trick, Vance, the lawyer, interjected softly. It is a business transaction. Since the deed is currently in both your names, we need your signature to facilitate the sale and the subsequent transfer of funds to the trust controlled by your son. Controlled by Leo, I said. And where do I live? In this penthouse? Elena looked away. Leo looked at his fingernails. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating. The plan, Leo said, not meeting my eyes, is for you to get a small apartment. In Silverwood. Something manageable. A studio, maybe. We will give you a stipend. $2,000 a month. It is plenty for someone with your simple needs. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They weren't just selling the house. They were discarding me. I was being evicted from my own life. They wanted the capital, they wanted the status, and I was the dead weight dragging them down. You planned this, I said, my voice trembling. The text message, the rush. You knew I would come here today thinking I was helping the family. We are helping the family, Leo snapped. I am the future of this family, Dad. Me, my career. Do you want me to be a nobody? Do you want me to be struggling to pay bills like you did? I have a chance to be a partner at Apex Justice Partners before I am 30. Do you know how rare that is? And you are going to stand in my way because you are sentimental about some piles of brick and wood? It is not just wood, Leo, I said, tears stinging my eyes. It is where you grew up. It is where I taught you to ride a bike. It is where... I reached for the brown paper bag I had placed on the floor next to my chair. My hand shook as I lifted it onto the table. I brought you this, I said. I made it for you. Because I thought you still remembered. I tipped the bag over. The broken pieces of the cherry wood horse slid out onto the laminate table. The body smooth and polished. The severed head. The snapped leg. It looked like a corpse. Leo stared at the wooden pieces. His face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. Toys? He shouted. You brought me toys? I am sitting here discussing $1 million deal and you bring me a broken wooden horse? He stood up abruptly. With a violent sweep of his arm, he backhanded the pieces of wood. They flew off the table. The heavy body of the horse hit the wall with a loud crack and fell to the floor, splitting again down the center. The head skittered across the linoleum and stopped at Arthur's feet. Grow up, Dad, Leo screamed. Stop living in the past. Nobody cares about your little hobbies. Sign the damn papers. I looked at the broken wood on the floor. That horse represented 4 nights of my life. It represented the love I couldn't put into words. And now it was garbage just like me. I looked at Elena. She was checking her watch. She didn't look at the wood. She didn't look at me. She just wanted this to be over so she could go to lunch. Sign it, Joseph, she said wearily. Don't make a scene. Just sign it and you can go. We have a car waiting to take you back to the bus station. The bus station. They weren't even going to drive me home. Mr. Vance uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen. He held it out to me. The nib glinted under the fluorescent light like a dagger. Right here, Mr. Garcia, he said, pointing to a line at the bottom of the page. And initial here, here, and here. I reached out and took the pen. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. My fingers were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I looked at the paper. I, Joseph Garcia, hereby relinquish all claims. If I signed this, I was homeless. I was alone. I was nothing. But if I didn't sign it? I looked at Leo's furious face. I looked at Elena's cold eyes. If I didn't sign it, I lost them anyway. They were already gone. The wife I loved and the son I raised had died a long time ago, replaced by these strangers who worshipped steel and glass and bank accounts. That is what a father does, I whispered to myself, repeating the words I had said on the bus. He gives until there is nothing left. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip touched the line, creating a small, black dot of ink that began to bleed into the fiber of the page. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to flip the table, to fight. But I was tired. I was so incredibly tired. I had spent 48 years building, and in one morning, I was being dismantled. "Just sign it," Leo hissed. "Stop stalling." I took a deep breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. I began to form the loop of the letter J. From the corner of the room, a cane tapped 3 times on the floor. Sharp, loud, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper. "I believe," a voice said, rasping, but cutting through the tension like a saw blade, "that there is a fundamental error in this contract." Leo spun around. "Shut up. Who told you to speak? Get out of here before I have security throw you out." Arthur did not move. He stepped forward into the light. He did not look like a frail old man anymore. He looked like a statue cast in iron. He looked at the broken horse head at his feet, then looked up at Leo. "The error," Arthur continued, ignoring Leo's outburst, "is that you are asking a man to sell something he does not legally own." "What are you talking about?" Vance, the lawyer, snapped. "We have the title right here. Joseph and Elena Garcia, joint tenants." "Check the deed history," Arthur said. "Check the original land grant from 20 years ago. The land beneath that house. Who holds the primary lien?" Vance frowned. He tapped quickly on his laptop. "That is irrelevant. The mortgage is paid." "The mortgage is paid," Arthur agreed. "But the land was never yours to sell, was it, Elena?" Elena went pale. Her hand went to her throat. I looked at Arthur. I didn't understand what he was saying. I looked at the pen in my hand. The ink was still wet on the single dot I had made. "Who are you?" Leo demanded, his voice wavering slightly for the first time. "How do you know about our property?" Arthur smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has cornered a rabbit. "I know," Arthur said, taking a step toward the table, "because I never forget a thief." The room went deadly silent. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed to grow louder, screaming in the quiet. I slowly lowered the pen, but I did not sign. I looked at the old man I had saved from the floor of a bus, and for the first time I realized that perhaps I wasn't the one who had done the saving. But before I could ask him anything, Elena made a sound. It was a gasp, a strangled noise of pure, unadulterated terror. She was staring at Arthur, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It can't be," she whispered. Her voice was shaking so hard, the words were barely audible. Arthur turned his gaze to her. "Hello, Elena," he said. "It has been a long time. You haven't aged a day. Shame about your soul, though." The pen slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the table, rolling across the contract of betrayal, leaving a long black smear of ink across the page. A line of darkness crossing out the end of my life and marking the beginning of theirs. The silence that followed Arthur's declaration was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with static electricity. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Leo was the first to break it. The shock on his face quickly curdled back into arrogance, a defense mechanism for a boy who had never been told no by anyone except his father, and he had learned long ago to ignore his father. He slammed his hand down on the laminate table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. "That is enough!" Leo roared. His face was flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "I do not know who you are, old man, and I do not care what kind of senile delusions you are having about my mother. But you have 5 seconds to get out of this room before I have you thrown out onto the street where you belong." He didn't wait for an answer. Leo reached over to the wall phone near the door and punched a button with violent force. "Security!" Leo barked into the receiver. "I have a trespasser in conference room 4B. I want him removed, now, and bring the police." He slammed the phone back into its cradle and turned to me, his eyes blazing with misplaced triumph. "You see, Dad? This is what happens when you bring stray dogs into a place of business. You get fleas, and now I have to call the exterminator." I looked at Leo and, for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to correct him or soothe him. I felt a profound sense of pity. He looked so powerful in his expensive suit standing in his high-rise tower, but he was blind. He was a child playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. Arthur did not move. He did not flinch at the mention of police. He simply stood there leaning on his cane, his posture as rigid as an iron beam. He was looking at Elena. My wife was sitting very still. Her hands were clenched on her lap. Her eyes were fixed on Arthur, squinting slightly, as if she were trying to tune a blurry picture into focus. There was a glass of red wine sitting on a coaster in front of her. A celebratory vintage she and Vance must have opened before I arrived, anticipating a quick signature and a toast to their new wealth. The dark liquid trembled slightly in the glass, reacting to the vibrations of her shaking hands against the table. "You should not have called security, Mr. Garcia," Arthur said calmly. His voice dropped an octave, losing the rasp of age and gaining the resonance of command. "You really should not have done that." "I am the associate here," Leo stepped forward, towering over Arthur. "I give the orders. You are nothing. You are a nobody in a dirty coat." At that moment, the heavy door to the conference room burst open. It wasn't just security. The commotion had evidently attracted attention from the hallway. 2 uniformed guards rushed in, their hands on their belts, ready to subdue a violent intruder. Behind them, drawn by the shouting, stood a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke charcoal suit. Mr. Henderson, the managing partner of the firm. I recognized him from the company website Leo had proudly shown me years ago. "What is going on here?" Henderson demanded, his voice booming. "I can hear the screaming from the elevators. Leo, explain yourself." Leo pointed an accusing finger at Arthur. "I am sorry, Mr. Henderson. This homeless man followed my father in. He is harassing my clients. He is making threats. I called security to have him removed." The 2 guards stepped forward, flanking Arthur. One of them, a burly man with a thick neck, reached out to grab Arthur's arm. "All right, Pop," the guard grunted. "Let's go. Don't make this hard." The guard's hand closed around the sleeve of Arthur's tattered tweed coat. "Stop," Arthur said. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He simply said the word with such absolute freezing authority that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Arthur lifted his head. He reached up with his free hand, the one not holding the cane, and slowly removed his gray newsboy cap. He shook his head slightly, and his white hair, though messy from the wind, fell back to reveal a high forehead and a face that was instantly terrifyingly recognizable to anyone who had studied the history of American law. He turned his blue eyes, those piercing electric blue eyes, directly onto Mr. Henderson. "Tell your men to unhand me Charles," Arthur said, "unless you want to explain to the board why you assaulted the majority shareholder." The silence that fell this time was different. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of a vacuum, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Mr. Henderson froze. His eyes widened, bulging slightly. He looked at the old man in the dirty coat. He looked at the cane. He looked at the blue eyes. "Oh my God," Henderson whispered. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. "Stand down!" Henderson screamed at the guards, his voice cracking. "Stand down! Get your hands off him! Now!" The guards jumped back as if Arthur had suddenly turned into a burning flame. They looked confused, terrified by the panic in their boss's voice. Leo looked between Henderson and Arthur, his mouth agape. "Mr. Henderson? What are you doing? He is just a—" But no one was looking at Leo anymore. Every eye in the room was fixed on Arthur. And then the sound of glass shattering tore through the air. Crash. I turned to look at Elena. She had been holding her wine glass, perhaps needing a drink to steady her nerves as the situation spiraled. But now, the glass had slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble threshold of the floor, where the carpet ended, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The dark red wine splashed across the floor, soaking into the hem of her expensive black dress, looking for all the world like a splatter of fresh blood. Elena did not look at the mess. She did not look at her dress. She was staring at Arthur, and her face was a mask of absolute horror. Her skin, usually so perfectly made up with foundation and blush, had gone a sickly, translucent white. Her lips were trembling so violently she couldn't seem to close them. "No," she wheezed. It was a sound of pure denial. "No, it is impossible." Arthur turned slowly to face her. He leaned both hands on his cane, standing tall, amidst the broken glass and the spilled wine. He looked like a judge pronouncing a death sentence. "Hello, Elena," Arthur said softly. "It has been 20 years. You look well. I see you finally got that pearl necklace you always wanted." Elena gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She looked like she was about to faint. Mr. Sterling?" The name hung in the air like smoke. Leo made a noise in the back of his throat, a strangled, choking sound. "Sterling? Arthur Sterling?" I saw the realization hit my son like a physical blow. I saw his knees buckle slightly. He looked at the old man he had just threatened to throw into the street. He looked at the man whose name was on the building, the man whose name was on the letterhead, the man who was for all intents and purposes the god of this world. "But you are dead," Elena stammered, tears of panic welling up in her eyes. "The rumors said you were in a hospice in Zurich. They said you were gone." "Rumors are a convenient thing for the guilty to believe," Arthur said, his voice cold and sharp. "It is easier to steal from a ghost than from a man, isn't it?" Mr. Vance, the slick lawyer, who had been so confident 5 minutes ago, was now standing up, backing away from the table, as if it were radioactive. He was shaking his head, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "I had no idea. Mr. Sterling, sir, I was just retained for a standard property transaction. I was told—" "Sit down," Arthur commanded, not even looking at him. Vance sat. He collapsed into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. Arthur took a step toward Elena. The crunch of glass under his worn shoes was sickeningly loud. "You dropped your wine, Elena," Arthur said, gesturing to the red stains spreading on the floor. "A waste. That is a 1996 vintage, isn't it? Very expensive. But then you always did have a taste for things you didn't earn." "Please," Elena whispered. She was shrinking in her chair, trying to make herself small. "Arthur, Mr. Sterling. Please, I can explain." "Explain?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Explain what? How did you lie to this man?" He pointed his cane at me. "How you lied to your son. How you built a life of luxury on a foundation of theft and deceit." I stood there paralyzed. My brain was trying to process the impossible information. The old man on the bus, the man I had helped up, the man who had ridden with me, listened to me, and walked with me. He was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire, the legend, and he knew my wife. "Joseph," Arthur said, turning to me. His expression softened instantly, the ice melting from his eyes. "I apologize for the deception. I needed to be sure. I needed to see who you were when you thought no one was watching." "You are the owner," I managed to say. My voice sounded small and far away. "You own all of this." "I do," Arthur said. "And I have been watching my company rot from the inside out. I have been watching parasites feast on the body of the work I created." He turned back to Leo. My son was leaning against the wall, looking like he was going to vomit. "And you," Arthur said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Leo Garcia, the rising star, the man who treats his father like a servant and the elderly like trash." "Sir," Leo gasped, "I didn't know it was you. If I had known—" "That is exactly the point," Arthur roared. The sudden volume made everyone jump. "If you had known I was Arthur Sterling, You would have offered me your seat. You would have kissed my ring. You would have been the perfect gentleman. But because you thought I was nobody, you showed me exactly who you are. Character is not how you treat your equals, boy. It is how you treat those who can do absolutely nothing for you. Leo slumped against the wall, covering his face with his hands. Arthur turned back to Elena. She was weeping now, silent, terrified tears that ruined her makeup, leaving black streaks running down her pale cheeks. "And you, Elena," Arthur said quietly. "Did you really think I would forget? Did you think 20 years was enough time to wash the stain away?" "I didn't have a choice," Elena sobbed. "I needed the money. I was young. I was scared." "You were greedy," Arthur corrected. "And you used the one man who actually loved you to cover your tracks." He looked at me. "Joseph, do you know why your wife was so desperate to sell this house? Do you know why she wanted to liquidate everything and move to the city?" I shook my head. I didn't know anything anymore. "Because she hates the sawdust?" Arthur laughed. It was a dark, bitter sound. "No, she does not hate the sawdust. She hates the evidence. She hates that house because it sits on the only piece of land that can prove what she did 20 years ago." "What did she do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Elena screamed. "Don't! Arthur, please! Don't tell him! I will do anything! I will sign anything, just don't tell him!" Arthur ignored her. He looked at Henderson. "Charles, get the file. The black file. I had my assistant bring it up. It should be outside." Henderson nodded frantically and ran out of the room. Arthur looked at me with deep sadness. "Joseph, sit down. You are going to need to sit down for this." I sat. I sank into the chair, my legs no longer able to hold me. I looked at Elena. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the floor, at the broken glass, and the spilled wine, her hands covering her mouth, as if to hold back the truth that was about to come spilling out. The room felt small. The walls felt like they were closing in. And in the center of it all stood Arthur Sterling, the ghost from the bus, holding the hammer of judgment over the ruins of my family. Mr. Henderson returned to the room, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. In his hands he held a thick black folder. It was old, the leather binding cracked and covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been pulled from the deepest, darkest archive of the firm. He placed it on the table in front of Arthur Sterling, with a trembling hand, treating the object as if it were an unexploded bomb. "Thank you, Charles," Arthur said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. He did not open the file immediately. He just rested his hand on the cover, his long, thin fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the leather. "Please, everyone sit down. We are going to have a history lesson." Leo sank into his chair, his eyes darting between me and the old man. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches and burned down the house. Elena did not move. She was frozen, her eyes fixed on the black folder. "Sit, Elena," Arthur commanded. It was not a request. My wife slowly lowered herself into her chair. She looked small. For the first time in 20 years, the imposing, sophisticated woman I knew seemed to shrink until she was nothing more than a frightened girl. Arthur opened the file. The sound of the stiff paper turning was the only noise in the room. He pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Leo. "Look at that boy," Arthur said. "Tell me who you see." Leo looked down. "It is Mom. And you." I leaned over to look. It was a picture from 2 decades ago. Elena was young, vibrant, standing next to Arthur Sterling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. She was smiling, but even then, there was a hunger in her eyes that I had mistaken for ambition. 20 years ago, Arthur began, his blue eyes locking onto mine. Elena was not just an employee. She was my private executive secretary. She managed my schedule, my correspondence, and, for a brief period, my discretionary expense accounts. "I know she worked here," I said, my voice hoarse. "She told me. She said she was an administrator." Administrator, Arthur chuckled dryly. That is a polite word for it. She was the gatekeeper, and she realized that the gate was made of gold, and she could chip away pieces of it without anyone noticing, or so she thought. Arthur pulled another document from the file. It was a spreadsheet covered in red ink. In the year 2006, Arthur continued, I began to notice discrepancies in the charitable disbursement fund. Small amounts at first. $500 here, $1,000 there, cleverly hidden as vendor fees and catering costs. But greed is a funny thing, Joseph. It is like a fire. It consumes the oxygen in the room until it grows too big to control. He looked at Elena. She was shaking her head slightly, tears streaming silently down her face. By the winter of 2006, the missing amount was not $1,000. It was $85,000. I gasped. $85,000. Back then, that was a fortune. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place. I caught her, Arthur said simply. It was a Tuesday. I called her into my office. I had the evidence. I had the bank transfers. She was facing 10 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. I looked at my wife. Elena, is this true? She didn't answer. She just sobbed into her hands. She begged, Arthur said, his voice hard. She got on her knees right there on my Persian rug and she begged for mercy. She told me she had a husband who worked himself to the bone. She told me she had a 4-year-old son who needed his mother. She played the only card she had left. Your family. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I gave her a choice, Arthur said. I told her that if she could return the money within 48 hours, I would not press criminal charges. I would simply fire her and let her disappear. It was a mercy she did not deserve, but I was soft-hearted back then. I thought about the little boy. Arthur paused, turning the page of the file. But she didn't have the money, did she, Elena? She had spent it. On clothes. On jewelry. On trying to look like one of the socialites she so desperately wanted to be. I felt the room spinning. The year 2006. I remembered that winter. I remembered it vividly, because it was the year my life changed. Wait, I whispered. A memory sharp and painful clawed its way to the surface of my mind. That winter you came home crying, Elena. You told me, I looked at her, my heart breaking in my chest. You told me that the firm was selling off a plot of land in Silverwood Bay, distressed assets. You said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to buy land for our dream house. You said we needed $85,000 in cash immediately to secure the deed before it went to public auction. Elena looked up, her eyes filled with panic. Joseph, please. I emptied the savings, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I went to the credit union, my father's inheritance, the money I had been saving for 10 years to start my own construction company. I took it all out. I gave it to you. And you thought you were buying land, Arthur said softly. I thought I was securing our future, I said, my voice trembling. I gave her the money. She brought home a deed the next day. I spent the next 20 years building a house on that land. My sweat is in that soil. My blood is in that wood. Arthur shook his head slowly. Joseph, the money you gave her never came back to me. I stared at him. What? She didn't pay back the firm, Arthur revealed. The $85,000 you gave her? She didn't give it to me to settle the debt. She knew I was going to fire her anyway. She knew her career here was over, so she used your life savings for something else. Arthur pulled out a photocopy of a check. It was made out to a name I didn't recognize, Marcus Thorne. Who is Marcus Thorne? I asked. He was the head of accounting at the time, Arthur said, and the only other person besides me who had seen the evidence of her theft. I was willing to let her go quietly if she paid, but Marcus wanted to prosecute. He wanted to see her in handcuffs. He was a stickler for the rules. Arthur leaned forward. She used your money, your inheritance, your hard work, to bribe Marcus Thorne. She bought his silence. She paid him $85,000 to destroy the physical evidence and erase the digital trail before I could file the official police report. By the time the 48 hours were up, the evidence was gone. I knew she did it, but I couldn't prove it in a court of law without the records. I had to let her walk away. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at Elena. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 25 years. I couldn't even finish the sentence. You didn't buy the land. You used my money to pay off a blackmailer? To cover up your crime? I did it for us, Elena screamed suddenly, her voice shrill and desperate. I did it so I wouldn't go to jail, Joseph. I did it so Leo wouldn't have a mother in prison. I saved this family. You saved yourself, I shouted back, slamming my hand on the table. And you lied to me. For 20 years you let me believe we owned that land. You let me build a house on a lie. Then whose land is it? Leo asked, his voice shaking. If Mom didn't buy it, who owns the house? Arthur closed the file. We will get to that, he said. But first, we need to address the present. Arthur stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing next to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding me when I felt like I was falling into an abyss. For 20 years, Arthur said, addressing the room, I have wondered about the husband of Elena Garcia. I wondered what kind of man would stay with a woman like her. I wondered if you were a co-conspirator. I wondered if you enjoyed the fruits of her theft. I thought perhaps you were just as rotten as she was. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a warmth I had not expected. That is why I was on the bus today, Arthur announced. I looked up at him. You were looking for me? I have been dying, Joseph, Arthur said matter-of-factly. Not immediately, but soon enough. My doctors tell me I have perhaps a year. I have no children. My wife passed away a decade ago. I have an empire of fortune and a charitable foundation worth billions, and I have no one to leave it to. He gestured to the glass walls of the office to the city beyond. I looked around my firm. I saw sharks. I saw wolves. I saw men like your son who would sell their own fathers for a partnership. I saw men like Charles Henderson who are too afraid to do the right thing. I needed an heir. Not for the law firm, that can rot for all I care, but for my foundation, the Sterling Trust. It is dedicated to building housing for the poor. It requires a leader who understands the value of a roof. Someone who knows what it means to build something with their own hands. Arthur smiled. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago to find Elena. I wanted to see if she had changed. When I found out she was trying to force you out of your home, I knew I had to intervene. But I needed to know who you were first. So you staged the fall, I asked. I did, Arthur admitted. I got on that bus. I made myself look weak. I made myself look invisible. I wanted to see if you would look through me like everyone else. I wanted to see if the husband of the thief had a thief's heart. He turned to Leo and Elena. Your husband, Arthur, said, his voice swelling with pride, saved me. He did not know who I was. He did not know I could reward him. He risked a confrontation with a thug to help an old man he had never met. He gave me his time. He listened to me. And even when he was facing the worst betrayal of his life, he treated me with dignity. Arthur looked back at me. You told me on the bus, Joseph, that a father gives until he has nothing left. You were wrong. A father gives because he has so much to give. Your generosity is not a weakness. It is your greatest strength. And it is the one thing that money cannot buy. Arthur reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded document. It was not old like the file. It was crisp new and on heavy bond paper. I came here today to make a decision, Arthur declared. I was going to wait to interview other candidates, but I have seen enough. I have seen the worst of humanity in this room. He gestured to Elena and Leo. And I have seen the best. He placed the document in front of me. Joseph Garcia, Arthur said formally. This is a draft charter for the new leadership of the Sterling Trust. It grants full executive control over the Foundation's assets, its building projects, and its philanthropic direction. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. I rode that bus to find a man who was worthy of my legacy. And I have found him. I want you to run it, Joseph. I want you to take my money and build houses for people who need them. Real houses, built with the care you put into that wooden horse. Leo made a sound like a dying animal. You can't be serious. Him? He is a carpenter. He doesn't know anything about managing a foundation. I am a lawyer. I am your employee. It should be me. Arthur turned on Leo with a ferocity that made him flinch. You, Arthur spat. You who were ashamed to be seen with your own father because he wore a gray suit. You who treat the vulnerable with contempt. You are not fit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a billion-dollar charity. Arthur looked back at me, his eyes softening. Joseph, I know this is sudden. I know you are in shock. But I am asking you, will you help me fix what is broken? Will you help me build something that lasts? I looked at the document. I looked at the man who had offered me a handkerchief on the bus. I looked at my hands, the hands that Elena hated, the hands that Leo was ashamed of. I stammered. I don't know anything about billions of dollars, Arthur, but I know how to build a house that doesn't fall down. That, Arthur said, smiling, is exactly where we start. But, I said, my mind racing back to the terrible truth that had just been revealed. What about my home? The one I live in now? If Elena didn't buy the land, then who owns it? Arthur's face grew serious again. He turned to the black file and pulled out one last document. This, Arthur said, brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and the reason why your wife and son are in very, very deep trouble. The document Arthur Sterling placed on the table was not thick, but it landed with the weight of a guillotine blade. It was a single sheet of paper, embossed with the official seal of the county recorder's office, dated just 3 hours ago. You asked who owns the land, Arthur, said his voice cutting through the thick tension of the room like a razor. This is the current title deed for the property at 42 Oak Creek Lane. He slid the paper toward Leo. My son looked at it. His eyes scanned the lines of text, and I watched as the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was a silent scream of career-ending realization. Read it, Leo, Arthur commanded. Read the name of the owner of record out loud so your mother can hear it. Leo swallowed hard. His hands were shaking so violently that he couldn't lift the paper. He had to read it where it lay on the table. The owner is... Leo's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. The owner is Sterling Land Holdings, LLC. Elena let out a sharp gasp. What? No. That is impossible. I have the deed at home. It says Joseph and Elena Garcia. You have a forgery, Arthur stated, turning his cold blue gaze upon her. Or perhaps just a fantasy you printed out on cardstock. You see Elena when you failed to buy the land 20 years ago because you were too busy bribing my accountant. The firm did not sell it to anyone else. We kept it. It remained on our books as a dormant asset, a piece of undeveloped land in a subdivision that we forgot about. Arthur leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. Joseph spent 20 years building a house on that land. He paid property taxes on that land, which I assume you intercepted and paid through the firm's accounts to avoid alerting the county, correct? Elena did not answer. The look on her face confirmed it. She had been juggling this lie for 2 decades, creating a complex web of deceit to hide the fact that we were squatters in a castle of my own making. So here is the situation, Arthur continued, his voice turning hard and clinical. You, Elena, and you, Leo, brought Joseph here today to sign a quitclaim deed. You wanted him to relinquish his rights to a property that neither of you own. You intended to take that signed document, falsify the title transfer, and sell the property to a third-party buyer, for $1.5 million. Arthur turned to Mr. Vance, the slick lawyer, who had been sweating through his expensive suit. "Mr. Vance," Arthur said pleasantly, "you are a specialist in real estate law, are you not? What is the legal term for selling a property you do not own by forging the title and coercing a signature?" Vance wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "It is fraud, sir. Grand larceny. Title fraud." "Correct," Arthur snapped. "And since this transaction involves interstate banking transfers, it is also wire fraud. And since it was conspired within the walls of a legal firm, it is a racketeering violation." Arthur stood up straight, towering over the table. The frail old man from the bus was gone. In his place stood the titan of industry, the man who had built Apex Justice Partners from the ground up, and he was ready to bring the hammer down. "Leo Garcia," Arthur said. The name sounded like a curse. Leo looked up, terror written in every line of his face. "Mr. Sterling, please. I didn't know. Mom told me the deed was real. I was just trying to help her." "You were not trying to help," Arthur interrupted. "You were trying to profit. I heard you. You need capital for your partnership buy-in. You were willing to make your father homeless to advance your own career." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He tapped the screen once. "Charles," Arthur said to Henderson, who was standing by the door, looking terrified. "Is the Human Resources database active?" "Yes, sir," Henderson squeaked. "Good," Arthur said. "Leo Garcia, employee ID number 4922. Terminate his employment, effective immediately."
"No!"
Leo screamed, standing up.
"You can't do that. I am a senior associate. I have clients. I have a future." "You have nothing," Arthur roared, slamming his cane against the floor. "You have no future in this firm. You have no future in this city. You used the resources of Apex Justice Partners to attempt to defraud a man of his home. You violated every ethical canon of the Bar Association. You are fired, Leo, and you will not be receiving a severance package. You will be receiving a security escort to the curb." Leo collapsed back into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad? Dad, do something. Tell him. Tell him it was a mistake." I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. And I saw a stranger. I saw a man who had laughed when his colleagues called me a delivery boy. I saw a man who had backhanded the wooden horse I carved for him. "I cannot help you, Leo," I said quietly. "I am just a carpenter. I don't understand these complex legal matters." Leo flinched as if I had slapped him. Arthur was not finished. He turned his attention to Mr. Vance. "And you," Arthur said. "Mr. Vance, you are not an employee of Apex, are you? You are outside counsel." "Yes, sir," Vance stammered, gathering his papers with trembling hands. "I was just hired to draft the papers. I will just go now." "You will go nowhere," Arthur commanded. "You drafted a contract for the sale of a property without performing a due diligence title search. That is gross negligence. Or more likely, you knew exactly what was happening and you wanted a cut of the commission." Arthur turned to Henderson. "Charles, contact the State Bar Association. I want a formal complaint filed against Mr. Vance by the end of the business day. I want his license suspended pending an investigation into his participation in a real estate fraud ring." "Done," Henderson said, pulling out his own phone. Vance dropped his briefcase. "My license? Mr. Sterling, please. This is my livelihood. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in private school." "Then you should have thought about that before you sat at a table with thieves," Arthur said coldly. "Get out of my building. If I see you in the lobby in 5 minutes, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Vance did not wait. He scrambled for the door, leaving his expensive fountain pen and his dignity on the floor. Now only Elena and Leo remained. Elena was staring at the table. She looked like she was in shock. Her lips were moving, muttering numbers. "1.5 million, she whispered. "The penthouse.
The trip to Paris. It is gone. It is all gone. It was never there, Elena, I said. It was a mirage. She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a sudden vicious hatred. This is your fault, she hissed. If you hadn't brought him here, if you had just signed the damn paper. If I had signed the paper, I said, my voice steady, we would both be in prison right now. Do you think the buyer wouldn't have sued when they found out the title was fake? You were going to destroy us, Elena. Arthur cleared his throat. There is one final matter. The house. He picked up the deed, the real deed, and held it out. Technically, Arthur said, the land belongs to Sterling Land Holdings, and under the law of accession, any permanent structure built on the land becomes the property of the landowner. That means the house you built, Joseph, legally belongs to me. Elena's eyes lit up with a flicker of malicious hope. See, she spat at me. You are homeless too, Joseph. You have nothing. You are just as pathetic as the rest of us. Arthur ignored her. He looked at me. However, Arthur said, reaching into his pocket again, I have instructed my legal team to prepare a transfer of deed. He pulled out another document. Joseph, Arthur said, I cannot give you the house directly, as that would incur a significant gift tax liability for you. However, as the newly appointed director of the Sterling Trust, part of your compensation package includes a housing allowance. Arthur smiled a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I am selling the land at 42 Oak Creek Lane to you, Joseph Garcia, for the sum of $1. He placed the transfer document in front of me. $1, I repeated, tears pricking my eyes. $1, Arthur confirmed. And since it is a sale, the title will be clean. The house will be yours. Yours alone. Sole and separate property. I looked at the paper. Grantee. Joseph Garcia, a single man. A single man? I asked, looking at the wording. Anticipatory drafting, Arthur said with a shrug. I assumed, given the revelations of today, your marital status might be subject to change in the near future. I looked at Elena. The realization of what was happening was washing over her in waves. The house was not being sold. There was no $1.5 million. There was no penthouse. And she had no claim to the house anymore. Joseph, Elena, said, her voice changing instantly. The hatred vanished, replaced by a desperate, cloying sweetness. She reached out and tried to touch my hand. Joseph, honey, listen to me. We can fix this. He is giving us the house. That is great news. We can still live there. We can kick Leo out if you want. It can just be you and me, like the old days. I pulled my hand away. Her touch felt cold. There are no old days, Elena, I said. There are only 20 years of lies. But I am your wife, she pleaded. You can't just throw me out. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I spent the household account on the deposit for the new apartment. You spent our savings on a bribe, I reminded her. You spent our retirement on clothes. And now, you have spent your last chance. I picked up the pen, the cheap plastic pen from my pocket, not the expensive one Vance had left, and I signed the transfer of deed. I signed my name, Joseph Garcia, owner. I looked at Leo. He was slumped in his chair, defeated. Leo, I said, you wanted me to leave the house. You wanted me to get a studio apartment. You said $2,000 a month was plenty for my simple needs. Leo didn't answer. I think, I said, looking at Arthur, that sounds like a fair arrangement for you. Leo looked up, shock widening his eyes. What? You have 24 hours to move out of my house, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, I felt a storm clearing. Both of you. Take your clothes. Take your jewelry. Take your expensive watches. But leave the furniture. I made that furniture. Joseph, Elena shrieked. You can't do this. I will sue you for alimony. I will take half of everything. Arthur stepped in. I would advise against that, Elena. If you file for divorce, I will personally see to it that the file regarding your embezzlement 20 years ago is reopened. The statute of limitations on the theft has passed, yes. But the statute of limitations on the fraud you attempted today has not even begun. And I have the best lawyers in the country on my payroll. Arthur leaned in close to her face. Walk away, Elena. Walk away with your freedom. Because that is the only asset you have left. Elena slumped back defeated. She looked at the spilled wine on the floor. It was a mess. A red, sticky mess. Just like her life. I stood up. I felt taller. The weight that had been pressing down on me for years, the feeling of being invisible, of being unworthy, was gone. I was Joseph Garcia. I was a master carpenter. I was the director of the Sterling Trust. And I was the owner of my own home. Come on, Arthur, I said. Let's go. This room smells like garbage. I didn't look back at my wife or my son. I walked out of the conference room, my work boots echoing on the floor, but this time, the sound didn't make me feel ashamed. It sounded like the steady, strong beat of a drum marching toward a new life. As we walked down the hallway back toward the elevators, Arthur chuckled. $1, he mused. That is the best real estate deal I have made in 50 years. You overpaid, I said, a small smile touching my lips. The roof needs fixing. Arthur laughed, a loud, hearty sound that echoed through the sterile corridors of Apex Justice Partners. Then, it is a good thing I just hired the best carpenter in the city. We stepped into the elevator, leaving the ruins of my old family behind us, and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed, sealing away the betrayal, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going down. I was rising. The elevator doors did not close immediately. I held my hand against the rubber safety bumper, keeping them open. I was not ready to leave yet. There was one final thing that needed to happen, a final severance of the cord that had bound me to these people for half a century of combined life. I turned back toward the conference room door. Leo was the first to move. The reality of his situation had finally penetrated the thick armor of his arrogance. He was no longer the high-flying associate attorney at Apex Justice Partners. He was a man who had been fired for cause, blacklisted by the most powerful figure in the legal world, and stripped of his inheritance in the span of 10 minutes. He looked at the open door, then at me, and his legs seemed to liquefy. My son, the boy who used to stand tall and mock my work boots, collapsed. It was not a graceful fall. He didn't sink into a chair. He slid off the edge of the leather seat and hit the linoleum floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the shards of broken glass from the wine glass his mother had dropped. He crawled toward me, his expensive navy blue suit dragging through the puddle of red wine, staining the fabric with the color of blood. "Dad," Leo choked out. His voice was high and thin, a terrified falsetto that I hadn't heard since he was 6 years old and afraid of the thunder. "Dad, please. You can't let him do this. You can't let him ruin me." He reached out and grabbed the leg of my trousers. His grip was tight, desperate. I looked down at his hands. They were soft, unblemished, manicured hands. They were hands that had never held a hammer, never felt the bite of a splinter, never known the ache of hard labor. They were the hands of a taker. "I didn't mean it," Leo sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat on his upper lip. "It wasn't my idea. I swear to God, Dad, it wasn't me. It was her." He threw a shaking hand backward, pointing an accusing finger at his mother. "She made me do it," Leo screamed, his voice cracking. "She told me you were old. She told me you were losing your mind. She said we had to sell the house before you did something stupid with the equity. She pushed me, Dad. She said I needed the money for the partnership, but it was her idea. I just wanted to make her happy. You know how she is. You know you can't say no to her." I watched him, feeling a cold, hollow space opening in my chest. This was my legacy. This whimpering creature, willing to throw his own mother to the wolves to save his own skin, was the result of my 25 years of hard work. I had worked double shifts to pay for his prep school. I had sacrificed my weekends to pay for his college. I had driven a rusted truck so he could drive a German sedan. And this was what I had bought. A coward. "Stand up, Leo," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the anger I expected to feel. There was only exhaustion. No, I won't get up until you forgive me," Leo blubbered, burying his face in my pant leg. "Tell Mr. Sterling to hire me back. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Please, Dad. I am your son. You have to help me. You always help me." "I have helped you enough," I said. I pulled my leg away from his grip. He fell forward, his face hitting the gray carpet of the hallway. "I helped you by teaching you right from wrong, but you didn't listen. You only listen to the part where you get what you want." Leo stayed on the floor, weeping into the carpet. It was a pathetic sight, but it did not move me. It only disgusted me. Then there was movement from the table. Elena stood up. She had watched her son crumble, watched him betray her, and her expression had shifted from shock to a cold, calculating resolve. She was a survivor. She had survived the embezzlement scandal 20 years ago by selling my future. She intended to survive this by selling her dignity. She smoothed the front of her black dress, ignoring the wine stains. She reached up and fixed her hair, tucking a stray lock behind her ear. She took a deep breath, and then she smiled. It was a terrifying transformation. The fear vanished from her eyes, replaced by a warm, glistening softness that I knew well. It was the look she gave me when she wanted a renovation on the kitchen. It was the look she gave me when she wanted a new car. It was the weapon she had used against me for 2 decades. She walked toward me, her hips swaying slightly, her voice dropping to a husky, intimate whisper. "Joseph," she said. She didn't look at Leo. She stepped right over her weeping son, as if he were a piece of furniture. She came to stand right in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Chanel, a bottle that cost $300 paid for with the money I earned installing drywall in the summer heat. "Joey," she said, using the nickname she hadn't used in 10 years. She reached out and placed her hands on my chest, right over my heart. Her palms were warm. "Honey, look at us. Look at what is happening. We are letting this misunderstanding tear us apart." "Misunderstanding?" I repeated. You tried to steal my home, Elena. You tried to erase me." "No, baby, no," she cooed, her fingers tracing the lapel of my cheap gray suit. "I was trying to help us. I wanted us to retire in style. I wanted to give you a break. You work so hard. I see it. I see how tired you are. I just wanted to take care of you." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet with unshed tears. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "We have been together for 25 years, Joey," she whispered. "Think about our wedding day, remember? We promised, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. We have been through so much. We raised a son. We built a life. Are you really going to throw all that away because of one bad day? Because of one mistake?" She leaned in closer. "Send Mr. Sterling away, honey. We don't need him. We have the house now. It is yours. That is wonderful. We can go home. I will cook your favorite dinner. I will rub your back. We can forget all of this happened, just you and me. Like it used to be." I looked down at her. I looked at the woman who had shared my bed, who had borne my child. And then I looked down at my own hands. I held them up between us. My hands were ugly. There was no other word for it. They were broad, thick-fingered, and covered in a map of trauma. The skin was rough like sandpaper. The fingernails were short and often bruised. There was a scar running across the back of my left hand where a circular saw had kicked back 10 years ago. There was a callus on my right palm as hard as stone from gripping a hammer handle for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. "Look at these, Elena," I said softly. She looked at them, and for a split second her lip curled in that familiar reflex of disgust, before she forced her face back into a mask of adoration. "They are strong hands, Joey. The hands of a provider." "They are the hands of a slave," I said. She froze. What? For 25 years, I said, my voice gaining strength. I used these hands to build a cage for myself. Every time I swung a hammer, I thought I was building a future for us. Every time I came home bleeding, or aching, or covered in dust, I told myself it was worth it because I was doing it for my family. I looked at Leo still sobbing on the floor. I looked back at Elena, whose smile was beginning to falter. But I wasn't doing it for a family, I said. I was doing it for parasites. I was feeding demons. I worked myself to the bone to buy you things you didn't need to impress people who didn't care if I lived or died. I sacrificed my dreams, my comfort, my dignity, just to keep you happy. And it was never enough. It was like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. That is not true, Elena protested, her voice sharpening. I loved you. I stuck by you. You stuck by me because I was useful, I said. You stuck by me because I paid the bills and I cleaned up your messes. You stuck by me because I was the fool who paid $85,000 to cover up your crime, and thanked you for the privilege. I gently took her hands off my chest and dropped them. It felt like dropping a heavy weight. I am done, Elena, I said. I am done being the foundation you stand on, so you can reach for things you don't deserve. Elena's face crumbled. The mask fell away completely, revealing the ugly, terrified reality underneath. You can't leave me, Joseph. I am your wife. I am 50 years old. What am I supposed to do? I have no job. I have no skills. I can't survive out there alone. You should have thought about that before you tried to make me homeless, I said. I will take half, she shrieked, her voice turning vicious again. I will get a lawyer. I will take half the house, half your pension, half of everything. Arthur Sterling stepped forward. He moved out of the shadow of the doorway and stood beside me. He didn't say a word to Elena. He just placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a light touch, but it felt like a mountain of support. He was the father I should have had. He was the partner I should have chosen. He was the only person in this room who saw Joseph Garcia, the man, not Joseph Garcia, the checkbook. The lady seems to have forgotten my warning about the fraud charges, Arthur said to me, his voice calm and conversational. Shall I make the call to the district attorney now, or would you like to handle this? I looked at Arthur. I will handle it. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out the folded papers that Leo had given me earlier, the contract of betrayal, the quitclaim deed. I held it up. You wanted a signature, I said to Elena. You wanted a contract. I took the papers in both hands and ripped them in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud and satisfying. I ripped them again and again until the contract was nothing but confetti in my calloused hands. I let the pieces flutter down to the floor, covering Leo's sobbing form like snow. I will not sign your contract, I said. But I want one of my own. I turned to the empty table where Mr. Vance had left his legal pad. I walked over, picked up the pad and the cheap pen I had used earlier. I wrote 3 words on the top page in big block letters. Petition for divorce. I ripped the page off the pad and walked back to Elena. I held it out to her. I want a new contract, I said. I want a divorce, irreconcilable differences, and I want it uncontested. Elena stared at the paper. Joseph, if you sign it, I said, my voice hard as granite, and if you leave my house within 24 hours without taking a single thing that I paid for, then I will ask Mr. Sterling not to reopen the embezzlement file. I will ask him not to press charges for the fraud you committed today. I leaned in close. But if you fight me, Elena, if you try to take $1 single more from me, I will let Arthur bury you. I will let him send you to federal prison for the rest of your life. And I will stand in the courtroom and testify against you with a smile on my face. Elena looked at me. She looked into my eyes and saw something she had never seen before. She didn't see the carpenter. She didn't see the husband. She saw a man who had finally broken his chains. She snatched the paper from my hand. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "You are a bastard, Joseph," she whispered. "No," I said. "I am just awake." I turned to Leo. He had stopped crying and was looking up at me with wide, fearful eyes. "And you," I said. "Get up. Stop crying. You are 24 years old. It is time you learned what it means to be a man. Being a man isn't about the suit you wear or the car you drive. It is about cleaning up your own messes. You made this mess, Leo. Now live in it." I turned to Arthur. "I am ready now," I said. Arthur nodded. He looked at the wreckage of my family. The weeping son on the floor, the defeated wife clutching a handwritten divorce, demand the spilled wine, the broken glass. "Then, let us go," Arthur said. "We have work to do. And I believe there is a bus leaving in 10 minutes. I walked out of the room. I walked past Elena without looking back. I walked past Leo without offering a hand. I walked out of the darkness of the corridor and into the bright, harsh light of the elevator lobby. I pressed the button. I was 50 years old. I had no wife. I had no son. I had a house that needed a roof repair and a job I didn't fully understand yet. But as I stood there watching the numbers light up above the door, I realized something profound. I was free. For the first time in 25 years, the air filling my lungs didn't belong to someone else. It was mine, and it tasted sweeter than the finest wine. The elevator descended smoothly, a sensation distinct from the stomach-churning rise I had endured less than an hour ago. Beside me, Arthur Sterling stood in silence, leaning on his cane, his presence filling the small metal box, not with intimidation, but with a strange, comforting solidarity. The digital numbers above the door counted down, 30, 29, 28, ticking away the final moments of my old life. "You were merciful back there, Joseph," Arthur said, his voice breaking the hum of the machinery. "More merciful than I would have been. I would have let the state police drag them out in handcuffs." I looked at my reflection in the polished brass doors. I saw the same gray suit, the same frayed collar, but the man wearing them looked different. The lines of exhaustion around my eyes seemed to have softened, replaced by a clarity I had not felt in years. "Prison is too easy, Arthur," I replied. "In prison you get a bed. You get 3 meals a day. You have a roof over your head that you didn't have to work for. It is a passive existence." I thought about Elena and Leo. I thought about their soft hands and their entitlement. I thought about how they viewed the world as a vending machine that dispensed luxury simply because they existed. "I don't want them in a cell," I continued. "I want them in the real world. I want them to wake up tomorrow morning and realize that the coffee doesn't appear by magic. I want them to understand that the roof over their heads costs sweat and anxiety. I want them to feel just for a moment the weight I carried for 25 years. Arthur nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "The punishment of reality. It is cruel in its own way, and very effective." "I want them out of the house in 24 hours, I said, my voice firm. "I don't care where they go. A hotel, a friend's couch, a shelter. It doesn't matter. But when I walk through that front door tomorrow evening, I want the house to be empty. I want the silence to be mine." "It will be done," Arthur promised. "I will have Henderson send a team to supervise the move. They will ensure that only personal items are removed. No furniture, no appliances, no assets purchased with the funds Elena misappropriated." The elevator chimed softly as it reached the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the cavernous white lobby of Apex Justice Partners. An hour ago, I had walked into this space, feeling like an intruder. I had felt small, crushed by the scale of the marble columns and the judgment of the people who worked here. I had clutched a brown paper bag like a shield, terrified of being seen. Now I stepped out and the air felt different. It wasn't just that I was walking with the owner of the building. It was that I finally owned myself. The lobby was bustling with the mid-morning rush. Lawyers in $1,000 suits were power-walking toward the exits phones, pressed to their ears. Assistants were sprinting with coffee trays. The receptionist who had sneered at me earlier, the one who had mistaken me for a delivery driver, was still at her post behind the black granite desk. As we approached, she looked up. Her eyes went wide when she saw Arthur Sterling. She stood up so quickly, her headset fell off and clattered onto the desk. Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her face flushing a deep crimson. "I didn't know you were in the building. Welcome back, sir." Arthur stopped. He looked at her with a mild, grandfatherly curiosity. "Thank you, my dear," Arthur said. He gestured to me. "I believe you met my associate earlier, Mr. Garcia." The receptionist looked at me. She looked at my work boots. She looked at my gray suit. But this time, she didn't see a laborer. She saw the man standing at the right hand of God. Yes, sir," she whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "I am sorry, Mr. Garcia. I didn't realize—" "It is all right," I said. I didn't feel the need to scold her. She was just another gear in the machine grinding away. "Just remember for next time. Sometimes the most important packages come in plain brown wrappers." We walked past the desk toward the revolving glass doors. The security guard who had threatened to throw me out was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in a break room to avoid Arthur's gaze. "Joseph," Arthur said as we reached the exit. He stopped and turned to face me. The wind formed the revolving doors swirled around us, carrying the noise of the city. "There is one more piece of business we need to discuss before you go." "The job," I said. "The Sterling Trust." "Yes," Arthur said. "But I want to be clear about what I am asking you to do. I am not hiring you to sit in an office and sign checks. I have plenty of accountants for that. I am hiring you because I have a project that has been stalled for 3 years. He pulled a small, folded blueprint from his inside pocket. Not a legal document this time, but a drawing. He unfolded it. It showed a complex of small, efficient homes centered around a community garden and a workshop. "The Hope Harbor Initiative," Arthur explained. "It is a housing project for veterans and single fathers who have fallen through the cracks. Men who have lost their way. We have the land. We have the funding. But every project manager I hire tries to cut costs. They use cheap materials. They hire unskilled labor to save a nickel. They build boxes, not homes." He tapped the paper with his index finger. "I need someone who knows that a house has a soul," Arthur said. "I need someone who will walk the site every day and run his hand over the framing to make sure it is true. I need a master carpenter to lead the builders. I need you to be the director of construction and community development. The salary is $250,000 a year plus full benefits." $250,000. I stared at him. That was 5 times what I made in my best year. It was a number that seemed abstract, like the distance to the moon. "Arthur," I said, "I don't have a degree. I don't have a certification in management." "You have a degree in life," Arthur countered. "And you graduated with honors today. You stood in a room with 3 wolves, and you didn't flinch. You made the hard choice, not the easy one. That is leadership, Joseph. The rest, the spreadsheets and the permits, I can hire people to teach you that. But I cannot teach a man to have a spine. You either have it, or you don't." I looked at the blueprint. I saw the layout of the workshop. I imagined the smell of fresh lumber, the sound of saws singing in the morning air, the feeling of building something that would shelter a man who felt as lost as I had felt this morning. "I will take the job," I said. "On one condition." "Name it," Arthur said. "I want to finish work on the community center myself," I said. "The cabinetry, the trim. I don't want to just point fingers. I want to work." Arthur grinned. I wouldn't have it any other way. We pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city struck me with a wall of noise and light. The sun had broken through the gray cloud layer, bathing the street in a harsh, brilliant white light. The wind was still blowing, but it felt cleansing now, stripping away the scent of the stale office air. I took a deep breath. It tasted like exhaust fumes and ozone, but To me, it tasted like freedom. I looked up at the apex building one last time. It rose 50 stories into the sky, a monument to greed and power. Somewhere on the 42nd floor, Leo was packing his things into a cardboard box. Somewhere in that glass tower, Elena was realizing that her life of illusion was over. I felt a pang of sadness, deep and aching. I couldn't help it. I had loved them. I had loved them with everything I had. But love, I realized, is not an infinite resource. It can be spent. And they had spent it all. I turned away from the building. I squared my shoulders. For the first time in 2 decades, I did not hunch against the wind. I stood tall. My spine felt like it had been reinforced with steel. I was 50 years old and I was just starting. "So," Arthur said, falling into step beside me. "Where to now? The bus stop?" "No," I said. "I think I will walk for a bit. I need to think. I need to figure out what to do with a quiet house." "A quiet house is a canvas," Arthur said. "You can paint whatever life you want inside it." He stopped then, as if he had forgotten something. "Oh, I almost forgot." He reached into the deep pocket of his tweed overcoat, the same coat that had made Leo sneer the coat that hit a billionaire. He pulled out a brown paper bag. It was my bag, the wrinkled, grease-stained lunch bag I had brought into the building. "You left this," Arthur said softly, "in the conference room, after the incident." I looked at the bag. I knew what was inside. The broken shards of the cherrywood horse, the symbol of my failure as a father, the debris of my rejection. "Keep it," I said, my voice thick. "It is trash. Leo was right about that. It is broken." "No," Arthur said firmly. He opened the bag and reached in. His trembling hand pulled out the body of the horse and the severed head. He held them in his palm, fitting the jagged edges together like a puzzle. "It is not trash, Joseph," Arthur said. He looked down at the wood with reverence. "It is cherry wood, hard, durable, beautiful grain." He looked up at me, his blue eyes fierce and kind. "Wood breaks," Arthur said. "That is its nature. It is organic. It lives, it breathes, and sometimes under pressure it snaps. But the miraculous thing about wood is that it can be mended. With the right glue and the right pressure and a little bit of patience, the joint becomes stronger than the original grain. The break becomes part of the story." He held the pieces out to me. "I know a very good carpenter," Arthur said. "I bet if he put his mind to it, he could fix this. He could make it whole again. Not for his son, but for himself. To remind him that things can be repaired." I looked at the broken horse. I saw the hours I had spent sanding it. I saw the love I had poured into it. And I realized Arthur was right. The horse wasn't a gift for Leo anymore. It was a piece of me. And I couldn't leave a piece of myself behind in that building. I reached out and took the wood. The pieces felt warm in my hand. "I have some wood glue in the workshop," I said quietly. "And some clamps." "Good," Arthur said. "Fix it. Put it on your desk at the new job. Let it be a reminder." "A reminder of what?" I asked. "That you can survive the break," Arthur said. He tapped his cane on the sidewalk. "I will have my driver take you home, Joseph. I insist. No more buses for today. You have a big day tomorrow. You have a house to reclaim." A sleek, black car pulled up to the curb, summoned by some invisible signal Arthur had given. The driver hopped out and opened the door. I turned to Arthur. "Thank you," I said. "For the job, for the house, for seeing me." "Thank you, Joseph," Arthur replied, "for picking me up." He watched me get into the car. As the door closed, shutting out the noise of the city, I looked through the tinted window. Arthur Sterling was standing there on the sidewalk, a frail old man in a tattered coat, looking like a king. He raised his cane in a salute. The car pulled away, merging into the traffic. I sat back in the soft leather seat, clutching the broken wooden horse to my chest. I watched the city scroll by, the buildings, the people, the life teeming on every corner. I thought about the empty house waiting for me, I thought about the silence. Yesterday, that silence would have terrified me. It would have felt like loneliness. But today the silence felt like potential. It felt like a deep breath before a new song. I looked down at the horse in my lap. I ran my thumb over the jagged splinter where the neck had snapped. It was sharp. It drew a tiny drop of blood from my thumb. I watched the red bead form bright and real. I was alive. I was free. And I had work to do. The car turned onto the highway, heading toward Silverwood Bay, toward the future. And for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't wondering if I was good enough for the destination. I knew I was the one driving. The house was silent. It was not the silence of a held breath which is filled with tension and waiting. It was the silence of a vacuum. I stood in the hallway, my work boots resting on the hardwood I had laid 2 decades ago. The grandfather clock was gone. Elena had taken that presumably to pawn it, since it fit in the moving van. The Persian rugs were gone. The expensive vases were gone. They had stripped the house of everything that could be converted into quick cash. But they had left the furniture I built. The dining table, solid oak and heavy as a tank, sat in the middle of the room, looking lonely but proud. The bookshelves I had crafted for Leo's room were still there, empty now of his law books and his trophies. I walked through the rooms. The air smelled different. The scent of Elena's perfume was fading, replaced by the smell of old wood and dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. I felt a strange sense of expansion in my chest. For years, I had walked through this house with my shoulders hunched, trying to take up as little space as possible. Now I stretched my arms out. I touched the walls. This was mine. But it was dirty. Not with dust, but with memories. Every corner held a ghost. Here was the spot where Elena screamed at me for tracking mud in. Here was the spot where Leo told me he was ashamed of my job. I needed to clean it. I needed to purge it. I went to the garage and retrieved my pry bar. I marched up the stairs to the master bedroom. This was the heart of the infection. This was the room where I had slept beside a stranger for 25 years. I looked at the floorboards near the window. I remembered laying them. It was a humid summer. I had sweated over every nail, ensuring the spacing was perfect. I looked at a specific board in the corner, hidden under where Elena's vanity table used to be. It was slightly wider than the others. I remembered cutting it. I remembered thinking that this house would last forever. I jammed the pry bar under the edge of the wood. With a grunt of exertion, I leveraged the steel. The nail groaned a high-pitched screech of protesting metal. The wood splintered slightly, but I didn't care. I heaved. The board popped up with a loud crack. I tossed the piece of wood aside. I looked down into the dark space between the joists. I expected to see insulation. I expected to see dust. Instead, I saw metal. Resting on the subfloor, covered in a thick layer of gray dust, was a rusted iron box. I frowned. I hadn't put that there. I had sealed this floor 20 years ago, and I had been the only one to ever touch the structure of this house. I reached down. The box was cold and heavy. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. It was an old biscuit tin, the kind Elena's mother used to keep sewing supplies in. The lid was rusted shut. I used the edge of my pry bar to pop the lid. The seal broke with a puff of red dust. Inside there was no money. There were no jewels. There were letters. A stack of them tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was yellowed and brittle. I picked up the bundle. My hands, usually so steady, felt a strange vibration, a premonition of something terrible and true. I untied the ribbon. I picked up the top letter. The date was June 14th, 2001. That was the year Leo was born. I began to read. My dearest Marcus. He suspects nothing. Joseph is so simple. He thinks the pregnancy is a miracle. He treats me like glass. It is almost pathetic how much he loves me. But I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop thinking about that night in the city. I froze. Marcus. Marcus Thorne. The accountant. The man Elena had bribed with my life savings 5 years after this letter was written. I picked up the next letter, dated 2 months later. The baby kicks and I know it is yours. He has your fire. Joseph is too gentle to make a child like this. I will name him Leo like a lion, because he will be fierce like his father. Do not worry about money. Joseph works like a mule. He will pay for everything. He will raise your son and he will never know that the blood in the boy's veins belongs to you. I dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor, landing on the dust-covered hardwood. I sat back on my heels. The silence of the house suddenly roared in my ears. Leo, my son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had held when he had a fever. The boy I had carved a wooden horse for. He wasn't mine. He had never been mine. Every moment of his life, every smile, every tantrum, every achievement. It was all a lie. He was the son of Marcus Thorne. He was the son of the man who had helped Elena steal from the firm. It made sense now. Arrogance, the cruelty, the hunger for status. Leo didn't just inherit his mother's greed. He had inherited his biological father's corruption. I felt a wave of nausea crash over me. I leaned forward, putting my head in my hands. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the house. It was my very bloodline. She had made me raise another man's child, while she secretly pined for him. She had used my labor to feed the spawn of her lover. I gasped for air. I felt like I was drowning. The pain was physical, a sharp knife twisting in my gut. I thought of all the nights I had watched Leo sleep, wondering if he would grow up to be a carpenter like me. I thought of the pride I felt when he graduated. Stolen. All of it. Stolen. But then something shifted. The knife in my gut stopped twisting. The nausea faded. I looked at the letters scattered on the floor. I looked at the rusted box. And I started to laugh. It started as a low rumble in my chest, and then it bubbled up into my throat, escaping as a loud, clear sound. I laughed until tears ran down my face. I laughed until my ribs ached. It wasn't a laugh of madness. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. I wasn't a failure. For years, I had blamed myself for how Leo turned out. I had wondered where I went wrong. I had wondered if I had worked too much or if I hadn't been strict enough. I had carried the guilt of his character flaws as my own burden. But he wasn't my burden. His cruelty wasn't a reflection of my parenting. It was a reflection of his nature. He was Marcus Thorne's son. He was Elena's son. He belonged to them. I was free. I truly, completely owed them nothing. The biological tether that I thought bound me to Leo, the instinct that said, "This is my blood," was severed. I had fulfilled my duty. I had raised a child. I had been a good father. The fact that the child was a cuckoo in the nest did not diminish my work. It only magnified my charity. I stood up. I gathered the letters and the box. I walked downstairs to the fireplace in the living room. I placed the letters on the grate. I struck a match. I watched the yellow paper curl and blacken. I watched the words, "My dearest Marcus," turn into ash. I watched the secret history of my marriage dissolve into smoke and float up the chimney, disappearing into the sky. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt light. I felt like a balloon that had finally been untied from a heavy stone. I turned my back on the ashes. I walked out of the house. I locked the front door. I didn't need to stay there tonight. The house was mine, but it needed to air out. It needed time to forget them, just as I did. I walked down the driveway past the spot where Leo used to park his car. I walked to the bus stop. But this time, I wasn't waiting for the number 42 to take me to a job site or a lawyer's office. A sleek, modern coach bus pulled up. It was blue and white with the logo of the Sterling Trust painted on the side. The door opened. Arthur Sterling was sitting in the front seat. He wasn't wearing his tattered coat today. He was wearing a simple, sturdy work jacket and a cap. He looked younger, vibrant. "You are late, Director," Arthur called out, checking his watch. "The convoy is leaving." I climbed the steps. I looked down the aisle. The bus was filled with men and women, Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, architects. They were talking, laughing, holding blueprints. There was an energy in the air, the buzz of creation. I took the seat next to Arthur. I had to clean up a final mess, I said. Arthur looked at me. He saw something in my face, perhaps the shadow of the fire I had just lit. He didn't ask for details. He just nodded. Is it finished? Arthur asked. It is finished, I replied. The foundation is clean. The bus lurched forward, leaving Silverwood Bay behind. We hit the highway heading west toward the open land where the Hope Harbor project was waiting. I looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. I saw my reflection in the glass. I saw Joseph Garcia. Not the husband, not the father, but the builder. I reached into my pocket and touched the mended wooden horse. I had glued it back together the night before. The seam was visible, a thin line of scar tissue running through the grain, but the head held firm. It was stronger now. It had broken, and it had survived. Just like me. I looked at Arthur. He was studying a map, tracing a route with his finger. We have a lot of work to do, Joseph, Arthur said without looking up. Winter is coming and we need to get 20 roofs up before the snow falls. We will get them up, I said. I will frame them myself if I have to, Arthur smiled. I know you will. I leaned my head back against the seat. The hum of the tires on the road was a lullaby. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the journey wash over me. I didn't know exactly what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever marry again. I didn't know if I would ever have another child. But I knew one thing. I had given my love freely. I had given my labor freely. And even though it had been stolen, twisted, and abused, it had not been wasted. Because the act of loving had made me who I was. It had forged me in fire. It had given me the capacity to sit on a bus next to a stranger and offer him a hand. And that hand had saved my life. I opened my eyes and looked at the horizon where the road met the sky. Kindness is never wasted, I whispered to the glass, for even if it does not change others, it will surely save your own soul. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Joseph's journey has touched something in your heart today. It is a reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, the truth will always set you free. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening to this story from? Are you in a bustling city like New York, a quiet town like Silverwood, or somewhere halfway across the world? Let's share our locations and connect with each other in the comment section. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, Calm Revenge Stories. Hit the like button to support our work. And don't forget to press the hype button so that Joseph's story can be heard by even more people who might need a reminder of their own strength. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next story.